Power grid scheme. Kennedy administration plans to socialize the power industry call for a nationwide power grid of long-distance transmission lines owned by government. Private investors are willing and ready to build all transmission facilities needed, but are prohibited because federal agencies want a monopoly. Kennedy is presently urging more than $2 billion in power facility construction in states throughout the Union where private investors are being prohibited from building. The record of TVA and Bonneville shows that government injures a region rather than helps when it monopolizes power. Government's high-level dams are generally the most expensive way of producing electricity, and they destroy fine forest and agricultural lands. Congress should compel the federal government to sell its power facilities and get out of the power business. That is a summary of my report on the power grid scheme. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Kennedy administration plans to socialize the power industry include not only an extension of federal power producing facilities, but also a nationwide power grid of high-voltage transmission lines connecting all power-producing facilities in the continental United States, so that electric power produced in any region can be delivered to any other region over facilities owned by the federal government. Privately owned long-distance transmission lines will be forced out of business by federal monopoly or harassed out of business by federal regulations. The first stage in development of the power grid will be 1,000 miles of high-voltage lines to carry power from Bonneville in Oregon to Southern California. This will help hide the failures of Bonneville Power Administration, the socialized power project of the Pacific Northwest. Despite billions of tax dollars spent, Bonneville could not adequately supply the region with power. Private enterprise, though taxed to help subsidize Bonneville, supplied the power deficiency. Now, Bonneville, during peaks of production, has a surplus of power that it cannot sell, even at below-cost rates which were fixed during the Depression years. Bonneville officials want to sell their surplus tax-subsidized power in California. But there has been a curious development. In the early years of the drive to socialize the power industry, there was established the preference policy of giving first call on federal electric power to publicly owned utilities and tax-favored cooperatives. Federal power bureaucrats have treated this preference policy like something sacred. Now they find themselves trapped by it. If they build transmission lines from Bonneville to other regions, preference customers in those other regions, especially big cooperatives and publicly owned utilities in California, can take most of Bonneville's below-cost power. This will create a problem for politicians in the Pacific Northwest, who have kept themselves in office by supporting tax-subsidized power for voters in that region. So the nationwide power grid scheme is stalled until politicians of the Pacific Northwest are appeased by legislation to guarantee that all users in their region be treated as preference customers for their socialized power before any of it can be sold elsewhere. Such legislation has been passed by the United States Senate. Until or unless the House acts favorably on it, however, the nationwide power grid scheme appears to be stalemated. Rivalry between federal agencies has also caused a stalemate. In 1962, the Federal Power Commission approved the plans of several private companies to construct a big interregional power transmission complex which would link the private power facilities of Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and California. The Department of the Interior, wanting to install its own power grid, blocked the FPC-approved private plan by suddenly announcing a new regulation prohibiting private power lines from crossing federal lands unless approved by the Secretary of the Interior. Since federal agencies own about half of all land in the western states, this new regulation, which went into effect in March 1963, means that the Secretary of the Interior has assumed authority to prohibit expansion of private power facilities in the West, and thus to guarantee a socialistic monopoly by governmental agencies. A central theme of propaganda for socialized power is that the government must build big power plants because private industry cannot or will not build them. The fact now clearly revealed is that private enterprise is willing and able to do an infinitely better job than the federal government can do. Note some comments of Senator Barry Goldwater concerning the High Mountain Sheep Dam, which the Department of the Interior wants to build on the Snake River in Idaho. Quote, "A Federal Power Commission examiner last October recommended a license to an investor-owned facility for construction of this project. The Department of Interior, however, contends that this project should be reserved for federal construction. The Interior Department publicly admits what it has long intended but publicly denied, that only the government should be permitted to expand power production in the Pacific Northwest. The High Mountain Sheep development would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but private companies are ready to build it at no cost to taxpayers." End quote. Note Senator Strom Thurmond's comments on a proposed government power dam across the Savannah River at Trotter's Shoals in South Carolina. Quote, "A private company wants to build a power facility which would produce 25 times as much power as the proposed government facility and at much cheaper rates. A private paper company wants to install a $50 million paper plant. These two private investment plans would bring employment to thousands and millions in tax revenues to the area. The federal government, however, will not permit the private investments because the government wants to build a $78 million high-level dam that would flood 24,000 acres, destroying the site for the proposed paper mill and other industries. The only advantage of the government dam, according to the Secretary of the Interior's own arguments, is that it will create a recreation area. We don't need government-controlled recreation areas in South Carolina, but we do need more jobs, more tax receipts, and cheaper electric power." End quote. One tragic fallacy of the bureaucratic craze for spectacular high-level hydroelectric dams is that damming up rivers is the best way to produce electrical power. In many cases, this is the most expensive way. The big high-level dams destroy fine, irreplaceable timber or agricultural lands. They upset natural water tables, and they often eliminate vast panoramas of natural beauty. Consider what the Tennessee Valley Authority has done. Before TVA, the Army engineers had estimated that a maximum flood would occur in the Tennessee Valley only once in 500 years, and that a maximum flood would cover 666,000 acres of land. In order to protect 666,000 acres from being flooded once every 500 years, TVA permanently submerged almost 1 million acres under man-made lakes, and the land thus destroyed was among the most fertile in the world. Socialists ran their own candidate for president in the political campaign of 1928, openly advocating socialized power, because they knew that control of electric power means ultimate control of all industry. But the people of the United States would not vote for socialism when it was honestly called by its right name. Socialists quickly learned that they must lie to the people, that they must advocate socialism under other labels. This they did. In droves, they infiltrated the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt and drenched the nation with socialist propaganda which never mentioned socialism. Their first major legislative victory was the TVA Act of 1933. TVA was sold as a flood control and river navigation project, which would cost about $150 million. Today, TVA is a $2 billion plus investment in a complex of hydroelectric and steam-generating plants which have socialized and monopolized the power industry in a whole region at the expense of the whole nation. The great power plants, the mammoth dams, and the man-made lakes in the Tennessee Valley have become a government showcase. Tourists can ride around the Tennessee Valley and see what $2 billion built. They cannot see the fertile lands and the great forests that TVA destroyed. They cannot see what $2 billion would have built elsewhere in all parts of the nation if it had been left in the hands of people who earned it and had not been seized in taxes for government's grandiose projects in this one valley. If government ownership and spending could produce real prosperity, the Tennessee Valley would be a paradise. But the fact is that the region is behind neighboring regions in industrial progress. And TVA was just the beginning. The Rural Electrification Administration followed next. Created in 1935 to relieve unemployment and bring electricity to farms, REA today is building its own electric generating plants, financing tax-favored cooperatives in the production and distribution of electricity, and in providing telephone service in direct competition with tax-paying enterprises, not just in rural, but in urban areas where REA was never supposed to intrude. Today, more than half of all REA electricity is sold to city users, and 4/5 of its new customers are in non-farm areas. The empire of socialized power has now spread until the bureaucrats fighting among themselves for control are admitting their real purpose of eliminating American private enterprise. In addition to the nationwide power grid scheme, the Kennedy administration is urging federal expenditures of more than $2 billion for construction of huge power facilities in Arizona, Georgia, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, South Carolina, and Virginia, where private power companies want to build and are being prohibited. Congress should reject all such proposals and should compel the federal government to sell all of its facilities, TVA, Bonneville, Hoover, Upper Colorado, all of them, to the people, to be run as private enterprises which would pay rather than waste taxes. This would stop the socialization of a key American industry. It would save taxpayers billions of dollars, which the operating losses of federal power plants now cost. And proceeds from sale of the big government installations could be used to make a substantial reduction in the national debt. I am Dan Smoot. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 417, The Power Grid Scheme. 6 copies, $1.